Here's my script. Could you read it?
Okay, yeah, and move that
Let's
script over
edit
here.
this part
Yeah.
out, okay? Going 10-1.
Rain dance, sun dance, con.
Let's do this. You guys ready?
Quiet
Thank you
on
so
set.
much for this award. Ready and action. Welcome back to a new season of Mel Moment Mondays. I'm your host, Mel, and this season we're focused on niche professions in the film and media industry. So, with that, today I'm kicking it off with an animator best known for helping bring Marvel's Miles Morales to life, along with Moana, Mitchell versus the Machines, and Sea Beast, and much more. Welcome, Joe Darko. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So what kind of got you into filmmaking and specifically animation? 2D and 3D, I guess that is.
Hmm. So it was, I guess I watched a lot of like films and cartoons growing up. And it was always like something that I found interesting. I would like put pieces of paper over the screen when I was young and just kind of like learn to draw by kind of tracing over the characters. Um, so yeah, it was always something that fascinated me. And I think I first fell into it through maybe comic books. Um, and yeah, I was like really into comic books growing up, and then somehow like also like a love of theater kind of fell in there. And I guess when I was much older, and I was essentially planning to do an architecture degree. I was fortunate enough to have like a professional from the animation industry come to our school to give a presentation on the making of The Dark Knight. And that shifted everything because it made me realize, oh wait, there's actually a job out there that involves all the things I like to do growing up, and it's like something I can do with my art skills that isn't architecture. Because previously I thought that's the only thing you could do. But anyway, yeah.
That's so interesting. Yeah. So you mentioned like liking comics growing up as well. Were there any comics specifically that spoke to you as a kid growing up, or any animated films as well that you were like, oh my gosh, wait, I like comics, I like drawing, and I could make movies like this could be a thing.
Mm. Yeah. So I grew up in Senegal, which is like a country in West Africa. And it's like a French colony, and so they speak French there. And essentially they get like a lot of French imports. And so I had a lot of kind of exposure to French cartoons and French comic books growing up. And so some of them that I remember liking when I was a kid was like Asterix and Obelix, which I think is a little bit more known here now. There was one called Spirou, which is about like a hotel clerk or something who gets up to shenanigans, I think. Um, and but then on the more Western side, we had like a few Disney animation like tapes. And the ones that I remember growing up with in our house were Snow White, Bambi, Sleeping Beauty, and there was one more, Jungle Book.
The
Um,
classics.
oh, and actually Pocahontas too. So like five of those. Um, and so I essentially like watched those movies the most growing up, and yeah, there was just something special about the Disney movies because they were sort of like there was a higher caliber of like artistry and like storytelling, and like um the characters were like fuller than maybe in some of the kind of like more like gag cartoon shows I would watch. And so that was always like a special thing to go to.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Disney is like ingrained in so much of our childhood, like just around the world. I feel like it's very pivotal in a lot of people's lives. How you also said that you went to university and kind of figured that you could put your drawing not only into architecture but into something more creative. How what was the leap going from just drawing into something where you're picked up by a studio or by a film project and they're like we want to have you as an animator. What kind of got you there?
Ooh, cool. Interesting question. I guess I'll break it up into two parts, like how I got the skills and then how like the first kind of job kind of goes. And so like in terms of like getting the skills that I needed, I think I really was like fortunate enough that my trajectory seemed almost like everything, just all the stars just lined up. Because again, like so I used to draw a lot when I was a kid. I would make my own comic books and sell them actually. Um, and and then from like comic books, I was always like, yeah, like I like doing this, I like creating characters, I like telling stories, but like I'm too slow on paper, or like I want to kind of just like create more of a universe. And so I fell into kind of like stop motion was my second kind of interest, and I loved making the little sets and everything like that. But eventually, like my vision got too big for my like budget. Was like a child. So I had like all these dreams to like make these elaborate sets and elaborate scenes, camera, motion, all that stuff. But I realized like you need all this like armature, and you literally need a miniature live action set, which is like a lot of stuff to acquire, and you need a lot of space for that. And so that's kind of what led me to kind of like look for other options. And then when I discovered that like CG animation was a thing where you can do it in the computer, and I was like, oh, like, well, I guess I don't need any like equipment, and I have a computer, and the software is free. It was at the time for students, and so I was like, well, this is great. Like the potential is limitless. I can just create within the computer, do whatever I want with the camera. And so I think that's where sort of like the journey took me to the 3D animation route. But all the skills that I had been kind of like honing and things I was interested in growing up, like the drawing side, the theater side, a little bit of acting, all of that kind of converged into um, the skills that I happened to need to do like computer animation. And I also liked kind of like computer stuff and maths. Um, so yeah, that's kind of how I fell into computer animation. It was kind of organic, but I actually didn't have the awareness that it was a job until we got that speaker who explained what the VFX industry is, and like that, there's a job called animator and they make the character move, all that stuff. And I was like, wow, this is what I want to do. Um, and so yeah, so that was the journey into it. And I guess in terms of the first jobs, I was fortunate also to start off as an intern within a big studio. I interned at Illumination MacGuff in Paris. They make Despicable Me, The Minions, films like that, Sing, the Mario movie that just came out. And so I was fortunate enough to be an intern with them in 2015. It was just like a short stint. It was like 4 months or whatever. But it was like right off graduating. And so I had learned essentially at my university like the whole pipeline of animation, from like character design to like putting the final image with like compositing on screen. Um, but it wasn't, I think, until I got to that studio that I kind of learned a little more of like what the day-to-day of an animator is like, what the studio requires of you, and how you should think about like the character performance. So that became more like of a targeted, specialized kind of training. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I'm always curious about um like animators and how they get to where they are, because I do a lot of live action, but obviously that's really different in many ways compared to 2D, 3D. And you've worked on like some top leading films in the last couple years, including, Spider-Verse, and the Spider-Verse short that you did, Mitchell's versus the Machines and Sea Beast, and in varying different roles from animator to lead animator to supervisor. Kind of tell me what that process is, working on these bigger movies, and like how how does that work? They hire you for something or you're in-house or whatever, and then, how does the director talk to you? How do you, is everyone, working on just like 5 seconds of the film, or do they do the whole film? Like kind of walk us through it.
Sure thing. So yeah, the thing with working at big studios is, I think especially these days, the machine has gotten so big, and it must kind of operate at such a like a quick speed compared to like back in the days. For example, like back in the days of production for like a film, an animated film might have taken like they might have spent like between like 3 to sometimes even like you hear like 5 years developing something, from like when they start developing it to when it comes out. Could have been as long as like 5 years, and they would like be in production for like 2 to 3 years on it. But now, like I feel like we almost from like announcing a film and starting to work on it. It might be still around like 2 to 3 years, but the actual production, most of the like animation of it happens in like months. And even when I started in industry, it used to be closer to maybe like you get like 8 months of like actual like go time, where like we're just making the film. And I've kind of like seen it in recent times dwindle even like further down to like 4 months,
Wow.
or less. So it's like things are being made at like like insane speeds, compared to how they were back in the days. And but the effect that that has is that the teams are formed in like a slightly different way. So you might have like more leadership than you did before because um, essentially like you can't. There's a limit to how much time one person can give a team. So if you're giving feedback to your artists, there's a limit to how many artists you can see within a workday of like 8 to 12 hours. Um, and so to sort of help with that problem, like the studio solutions are to have additional leaders. And so if one person can only see this many, two people can see twice as many. And so and so that sort of is how I think across like multiple studios they've tried to tackle that problem of like the higher demand of animated content, by expanding their like teams, and that's like from artists to leadership to the supervisors, everything like that. Um, so yeah, but what that means for the artists themselves is that they do, as you prefaced, get less animation to do on a film. So whereas like a team might have been smaller and they might have allocated more time to the production of it, where maybe back in the days you would get like 2 3 minutes to five, maybe even if you're lucky, of like animation on a film. Uh, like these days it can be as little as like 10 seconds to like 30 seconds to 1 minute, after like maybe a year and a half of working on the film. That's all you might like walk away with, because maybe like the story goes through a lot of rewrites, maybe, um, you know, for one reason or another. But like essentially, I think if you look at some of the credits, these days, you can easily see like above 100 artists on there. Like I think like Spider-verse or Sea Beasts were like, I don't know, 120, 160, something like that. Um, and so if you divide that number of artists by the length of the movie, which, your average movie is 90 minutes, and if there's like 120 people working on it, that means the average is less than a minute for each animator. So it like as like rough math. And so yeah, so that's like something to keep in mind. And that's kind of how it works at big studios. You're hired to do one task and do one task very well. And there's just like it's almost like the what's that the pit stop thing with the race cars, the car, and there's like six people that just like tackle the car, and someone's like taking the wheels off and polishing so like everyone is trained to do like one specific task very well. And that's sort of like how I think the studios run these days and how they hire. They don't look for generalist artists as much that are able to do multiple roles. They just want like specialists who are very good at doing like one role, and they hire them for that one role. And that one role is what you'll do for like 90% of your time at the studio. Um, and yeah, so that's kind of how it is. And like everyone is helping each other, which is like a nice thing. Especially when you're like maybe in stepping into like a role for the first time, like leadership, stuff like that. You have like a lot of people around you that are able to support because everyone is just like they've just a different person for every different job there, basically.
Yeah, I can imagine it can get a little overwhelming, especially with deadlines and everything too. What departments do you specifically work with the most? I know there's like, kind of I think how it works in, animation, you have like kind of the story, the concept art, you go to modeling, the animation, then you tack on all of the effects on top of that. Um, so what do you do specifically within the animation department? And yeah, what departments do you kind of work off the most? And what information are you given beforehand to like create a scene?
Great question. So I am specifically known as like a character animator. So you might hear the term animator as in like an umbrella term for everyone who works within this industry. But my, I guess, more specific term is character animator. And so what that means is that I'm actually in charge of like the performance or the acting of the characters you see on screen. Um, and so it's kind of like sum up our job, it's like our role to we get these kind of like lifeless puppets, digital puppets given to us, and then we have sort of like um, a plan given to us of like what the scene of the film is supposed to communicate, and that plan will be given to us through storyboards, which are like hand drawn 2D, almost like comic book panels, but they like cut and edited as a film. And then there'll be like a 3D representation done in layout, which is a different department. But they won't have any performance information on it. They'll just have kind of like staging and camera and like 3D stuff there. And so we get those two things. Those two things are like taken care of before we get called on as animators. So storyboard artists would have done their job doing the comic version, and layout artists would have done the camera and staging setup in 3D space. And so we come along and we have this comic book representation of what sort of like the director wants to see. We have like what it actually would look like in 3D space, because maybe sometimes between the 2D it's a little bit rougher, sketched out. But now we have like a 3D locked in representation of what space looks like. And then our job is just to kind of like bring that character, that lifeless puppet to life, add some personality, add some attitude. A good place to start is by like matching what you see in the storyboards, but often we're encouraged to like go beyond and like find more nuance and more entertainment in the performances. And so that's essentially like um, the job of the animator is like sort of the actor of the animation movie. The only difference is sort of like an actor might just live in one character for the whole movie, a live action actor. But in animation, from scene to scene, we can switch. So you can be animating like um, tall male character, and then the next scene you're animating like dog, and then the next scene you're animating like old grandma. It kind of keeps it interesting and pretty fun, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned like animating different things. What is there any difficulties going like, if you're really confident with, animating humans and then having to do some like mythical beast or something? What are there any difficulties with that or any limitations you find animating between the two?
Mm, I definitely think uh, different people have preferences, and they lean stronger towards certain characters than others, just based on, I think, your life experiences. Basically, you might connect with a character more than another. And sometimes, like if a production allows it, like you can kind of like voice your preferences a little bit, and they'll try to accommodate. Like I know on Into the Spider-Verse, there was this animator, Steven Johnson, who was like one of their go-to people for Miles Morales, because he's like from Brooklyn. He grew up there, and he just like he had really great insight on the character, um, and so people would lean on him for like um, ideas or opinions on like Miles' performance, things like that. Um, and so yeah, so I think like in different films, like people tend to lean towards a different character that maybe they might see themselves in a little more. Um, but yeah, I would say the same, that I have characters that I prefer, but I wouldn't say like there's any, I guess, challenges that I've come across where I'm like, man, I'm really struggling to animate this character. I just have no idea. I usually see it more as like a fun challenge, that if I don't instantly like connect or see who this person is, I can kind of like take it as an opportunity to go do some research, and like kind of learn about different types of people out there in the world. Like for Moana, like for example, like we had a bunch of cultural talks from like Pacific Islanders, things like that, which was really cool to kind of like learn a little bit about their culture and things like that. Yeah.
That's so awesome. What have you found are the differences between like what are the differences between like just being an animator or like a lead animator or an animator supervisor? I know you've in some of your credits you're a lead animator versus, just an animator. Do you find that you have more room for creativity as the lead, or is that more of an overseeing job, making sure everyone's doing, what they should be doing?
Mm. So yeah, I think I'd say like usually just to just to preface the answer a little bit, I think like credits can be a bit misleading sometimes, in the animation industry. Why? Because it's very strange, but for some reason, all the studios have a different way of naming the same role. So, so at Sony, they used to call lead animator the person in between the animator and the animation supervisor who oversees the department. That person was called the lead animator. So the animation supervisor would kind of oversee the whole department and communicate directly with the director. The lead animator would work with the artists, and sort of be that bridge between the supervisor, which might not have time to see the whole team, but there would be maybe like 8 different leads, and each lead would have up to like around 15 artists under them, um, and that would be their little team. So in more like accessible terms, it's almost like the animation supervisor is the headmaster of the school, and then the leads are the teachers, and they have their class. Each lead has a different class group, and there's the headmaster up top here, who's the animation supervisor. Um, and that's sort of like how they used to kind of note the terms at, for example, Sony. So it was animator, lead animator, animation supervisor. However, like for the same roles at, I think, Disney, it's animator, supervising animator, and then it's like, I think it's head of animation. And so their lead is called supervising animator, and our head of animation is called animation supervisor. It's super confusing already. And then at Pixar, it's like directing animator and like I don't know, supervising. It's all just all the terms are like mildly called very similar things, but they mean different things, or sometimes they mean the same thing, but they have a different name. And so I think yeah, it's like always when you look at the credits, like take it with a pinch of salt, but it's always better to just ask the person, so what did you actually do on the film? And so to go back and answer your question, um, I'll answer those in the like Sony terms. So we'll go animator, lead animator, and animation supervisor. Um, so as an animator, essentially you get to also answer your previous question of how it works when we're assigned some work. We'll get an either an issuing or a launch, which is a meeting where the director will kind of sit down with the team of animators and essentially we'll pick like a scene from the movie and they'll explain what um, the scene is trying to achieve. So, like, what it's trying to say, what's the character's journey through the scene, um, what are we communicating? Is there any subtext to what's being communicated? So they'll kind of like break down all the story points that need to happen to be communicated, and sort of is just to get us all on the same page before we go off and start kind of brainstorming what kind of performances we can do. So the director will give us this kind of kickoff where they explain what they want for the scenes, and then the animator can use that time to ask any questions, any clarifying questions. Um, and then we go off to like start doing our first pass of like acting takes and all that stuff. So that's the animator's role, and it's just to like work on that performance specifically. Now the lead animator usually when the production's getting started, they might be in charge of doing some like character tests and developing the actual like puppet rig to make sure it can do all the moves that are required for it to do. So let's say it's like more of a Looney Tunes type show where it's super cartoony, super like wacky, super pushed. Um, the lead animator would have to make sure that like the 3D computer puppet can handle like all that crazy motion, versus if it's more realistic, like a Marvel movie, and it's like the Hulk, just making sure like all the muscles and the anatomy and stuff is moving correctly. Um, and so that's like one of the lead animator's roles, like early on in production, just to get the characters prepared, and also to create like examples and sort of essentially just like a go-to uh, encyclopedia of who this character is, how they move, you know, just essentially because like animators just like I said, you could be working on like one character here, and the next character is a dog, and then the next character is a different one. So you want to be able to get a sense of like who is this character I'm about to animate because I've never animated them before. I'm new to the film. I have no idea who they are. Are they like a sly person? Are they like shy? Are they, you know? And so it's the lead animator's kind of job to have all that information like in a concise and clear like place that people can find and can kind of like quickly get inspired and understand who this character is. Um, but when that fails, it's also the lead animator's job to make sure like that the character is staying on character. And so they also help oversee because people always ask like, how does the character always come out, you know, like one person, but there's like so many animators working on it. That's like the lead animator's job to also like make sure that the character retains its kind of personality, retains its mannerism and stuff throughout the film. Um, and then you've got and also the lead animator can be the first kind of like a check-in point when an animator has like done a pass of animation, and they're like, yeah, you know, I think this looks cool. Um, I want to show it to the director, and maybe they like check in with the lead just to see like, hey, what do you think of this? This is like what I came up with for the scene. And then at that point, the lead animator can be like, yeah, it looks cool. We should check in with the director. Maybe if you have time, you know, adjust this just for like to make it feel more like the character. And then it goes through to like usually the director and the animation supervisor might see it at the same time. Um, and the animation supervisor is a little bit more like in tune with what the director has in mind. So as an animation supervisor, you're essentially like your biggest role is to develop this kind of like unspoken skill of like reading the director's mind, and almost like anticipating everything the director will say before they say it, because you want to be able to like communicate that to your team. So if someone shows you a piece of work, um, you want to be, you almost have to take yourself out of it. You know, your instinct might be like, I love this. I think this looks great, you know, but but then you have to like ask yourself like, but what would the director say? Like knowing what I know of the director, what does the director like and what the director say? And that's your job as the animation supervisor is to like facilitate that kind of like experience of being like a limb of the director because the director can't be in every department looking at animation, looking at lighting, looking at storyboards. They can't be in all those places at the same time. Like there's not enough time in the day. And so that's why they have these different like department heads, animation supervisor, VFX supervisor, that are like tasked with kind of like bringing that expertise, but also knowing like very well what the director sensibilities are, so that they can kind of like expedite like getting the notes from the director before the director's even seen it, so that when the director sees it, they can almost just go like, "Yeah, love it. It's exactly what I wanted. Great." Um, so yeah, so the animation supervisor works a little closer with the director and the client side, just to kind of like get an idea of what they want, um, and they might be in more like meetings about like hiring people, like to get the personnel needed for the team, or also like assignments and casting the who does what scene, like which artist does which scene, things like that. Yeah, I'd say that's about it. So supervisor kind of oversees the whole department, but they're really mostly in meetings with the director and the creative team up top, and they're like a team of leads who are like the teachers, to just like make sure the information is getting across. And then the leads are in charge of each little classroom of artists in there. Um, yeah, so everyone has like a different role, and it all makes the machine like run really well. But I will say a misconception from back in the days is that the lead animator, I think, used to be one that handled some of the biggest performance moments, because they knew the character the best. But I think these days a lead animator is more of like a manager overseeing the floor. And then there's like, yeah. So I say like honestly, having done like a little bit of both roles, I think um as an animator, you're like right there with the scene with the performance. So you get a lot of like artistic creativity. Um, as a supervisor, you're working like with uh, like director, so you can like suggest things at a story level. And so you have more of like your hands in the overall like products that you're making. And I feel like the leads are just in the middle where they just have to manage stuff and make sure everything is running smoothly for everyone, and they don't end up getting as much time to actually make art. Um, and so that's like a misconception that like the lead animator means that you uh, do the most animation on the film. It used to mean that, but it doesn't so much these days.
That's so interesting how the terms are different per studio and also how it's changed over time. I would have never guessed.
Yeah, sure. It's all like I think due to kind of like the demand of like animation, how that's changed has affected the jobs and things like that. Yeah.
Kind of going off of like how the departments run, how do you like receive feedback and the drawing and the turnarounds and the time? Like time in general, like how long does it take to like animate a scene, like an action scene, versus maybe coverage? And then also the time that it takes to correct something if the director, wants something a little different and you have to go back and like change something. How much does that impact maybe the deadline or like your day in the office or just time?
So yeah, it works a little differently at each studio. I'll say most of the big studios uh, operate roughly around like a speed of between like 3 to 4 seconds of approved animation per week. Um, and so that's sort of like roughly the speed, but it doesn't mean that like each week we're like submitting necessarily like 4 seconds of animation, because sometimes you might get like a scene that's like 10 seconds long, 20 seconds long, or whatever. and they give you like a whole month or two to work on that scene. And so you just be like checking in with the team, maybe like every every week or every so often, every couple of days, just to show them your progress, show them like where you're at. But essentially, like the way it works is once you get that kickoff or issuing from the director that tells you like what they're looking for in the scene, the animator will go away and either come back once they have either a pass of um, it could be like video reference, which is like a live action. So you can like literally like just perform what you intend to animate and cut that together and then show a pass of that to like the director just to get an early buy off of like this is the idea I'm planning to do. Do you like this or do you want me to change it? Because that's like a quick response. So you wouldn't like waste time sort of like in animation. You kind of try and get your answers like a little earlier. Some people do it through sketching. So they might do like a rough pass of 2D animation, just to get that same sort of like quick response before they get into like the computer, because the computer can be really slow, unfortunately. Um, and so yeah, so essentially like you might show a pass of reference is what we call it first. Maybe like a few days after you've sort of had that initial meeting with the director to check in, and consolidate the ideas that were discussed. And then after that, you would potentially like show what's called a blocking, which can be essentially like um, so it'd be in 3D with the actual characters this time, and but they might just be doing like some of the most key story kind of like beats of the scene. So they might not be like fully like fleshed out and moving in like fully realized ways. But it's almost like looking at a 3D kind of comic panel. They'll just be having those like main uh, story moments or main like ideas of the shot would be like represented there in your blocking. So that's kind of like what the blocking is for. And some people just show it with just like static poses that change from this moment to that moment to that moment. And some people show it with like maybe more like unrefined like motion, but it's like understood that it's the early stages, so they're not like being too picky on the motion. They're just like giving like a general idea of what's going to happen. Um, and then after that, once the blocking is like has been shown and you've got a note, usually like you would present it in like a review with essentially your director, your supervisor, and your lead would be in the room. And sometimes there's like fellow animators in the room also, or people from like the lighting supervisor, you know, so they can all kind of be there and like call out some things that like, hey, actually, if you have your character like looking down like this with the lighting, you know, you might get a lot of shadow, you might not see their expression, things like that. So they can call out some of those things early on. But yeah, it's mainly a space for the director or directors to sort of just like agree or like try to like steer the ship. Sometimes ideas change, so that would be a space too where like you do exactly what maybe they pitched in the initial meeting, but then seeing it in 3D, they're like, actually, this is giving me an idea for like a funnier joke, so let's try do this instead. Um, and so yeah, so you kind of get those. That's how you receive feedback. It would be usually like in that meeting, and everyone's in a room and they talk to each other. During the pandemic, and depending what studio you're working at, it might just be on Zoom. So it'd be like this, but just in a Zoom meeting full of like a lot more people, and they would all just kind of like discuss your shot and look at it together in sync. Um, so that's kind of how we get feedback, and depending whether it's like a big note to turn around, it's like a complete new idea. You might take more time to show that adjustment. If it's just like they like what you've done, and they're just like, yeah, just carry on with the animation. At that point, I think like usually like it gets exponentially like more tedious. And so like if you show like some reference like a few days after you've had that initial meeting, you might show a blocking like maybe a week after that reference is approved. And then if that blocking is approved, you might show like your next pass where the motion is a bit more like fluid. You might show that like another week or a week and a half after, is it just like you're filling in more and more information every time. But essentially the understanding is that like if you're checking the sort of like the foundation and the scaffolding of the shot, then like once the whole building gets realized, it's kind of like it's on the right tracks. It's got the right
Right.
foundation, and so you can afford to kind of like disappear for like a few days, and the team will kind of like trust that you're going in the direction that they are like expecting. Yeah.
That's so interesting. Yeah. I always find that really interesting, kind of how animation and the turnarounds happen and the tweaking because I know a lot of times, in animation specifically, you don't have as much room or budget to keep changing things. That's everyone's time and money, not just, asking an actor to step a little bit more to the right or a little bit more to the left. That could be a whole day's work, you know. So
Yeah.
I find the difference between live action and animation just really fascinating. Kind of to blend the two together, I always wondered how animating with the voice actors work. Do you receive what the voice actors say beforehand so you can kind of animate with the pace of their words, or is it the other way around? They're trying to, copy something that you've already animated, or does it depend?
In an ideal scenario, I think most studios aim for having a recording of the actors done, um, sort of done and cut together with the storyboards. So in that 2D kind of comic book style exploration edit of the movie, they would have the actual voice actors in there, so that you can get the a real sense of what the scene will play like. They would have the real actors, the proper cadences, all that stuff, and that will pass on. And when it gets to animation, we can get inspired by the way the line was read, because that's a big thing. Because like in live action acting, the person is like one being. They are the voice. They're the embodiment of the character. They're everything in that moment. Um, and but in animation, it's kind of like being extrapolated into these different parts. Um, but one thing we have like identified in animation that like really makes the difference between a character feeling alive and a character feeling like you can see the strings behind the kind of thing is that like um if you manage to connect the like performance choices to the sound, the voice, um like there's so much entertainment there, but that really like brings that illusion to life. um because like the actors, and honestly I'm really like impressed with voice actors because I don't know how they can bring so much character. Like a good voice actor can bring a lot of character just in their voice. They might not see a video recording. Sometimes we do get the video recordings of them in the booth, that we can see, but most times we don't. And it's really impressive, sort of like knowing that they're just like in this little box. It's really impressive, kind of hearing like how much comedy, how much emotion like comes through the reading of these lines. Um, because you can almost see an image instantly, like when you hear their voice reading that line. And that is often like some of the things that animators lean on is like the image that they get, from hearing that sound. And sometimes actors can add little breaths, little pauses, little like clearing your throat, things like that. And that really like makes that character feel alive because you're hearing these kind of human moments in between the lines and things like that. So it really always pays off when you have the actual voice actors, audio before you start the animation, because you can plan to put all of those moments, all those nuanced performance moments, uh, inside the animation. But sadly, often what happens is that we get scratch audio, which is um, essentially like someone at the studio would record the lines, as a placeholder whilst maybe the company is like finalizing the contract for the actor they chose, and it's like famous actor or something, so it takes a while. Um, and so, but to not delay the production, they would like do use scratch audio, and so we might animate to that scratch, which is just recorded by a random person in the studio, um, and kind of just get the project moving, and then at the end the actor will come back, and in those cases where we've animated full scene to scratch audio, then the actor would try and re-record and match the timing of the animation as closely as they can. And then sometimes there's a little bit of a back and forth of like, okay, now the actor has re-recorded, but now we need to just I need to readjust the animation. Um, or yeah, things like that. But yeah, the ideal scenario is the voice comes first.
Yeah.
Sometimes we just have to make do without.
Yeah, that is a difficult balancing act, and it's art at its pure for the like it's just it's so amazing to see. I love seeing the if there are behind the scenes, seeing the voice actors and then the animators animating their thing, and then the final product. It's like it just really is cool. And kind of talking about just how cool animation is. Over the past couple years, the 2D, 3D animation combo has really been like the new hip thing for like all of these studios and movies to be doing. It's such a unique look compared to just having 3D or just having, older 2D animation. Um, what have you felt are the differences or something that's surprising to you when combining those two together? Um, and how do you see the future of animation going, considering, I feel like animation is really pushing the boundaries these days, and it's really cool to see. I feel like Spider-Verse is something that like really shocked audiences back in 2017, I think, when it first came out. Like this is something so different that we just haven't seen before. And there's so many more films and TV shows that are similar to that now, using that 2D, 3D, and others that are, I mean, what won the Oscar this year, Flow, is like something that's like, you could just do the guy did it at home. Like it's so inspiring and cool. What's been your experience with it?
Um, yeah, like I think honestly, I think this is how it's always meant to be. Like it was always meant to be like this. Um, I think, and personally, I love the direction the industry is creatively going in right now. Um, I think at the start of 3D animation, artists and studios were kind of just like limited to what the computer could do at the time. Um, and that's why we got films like Toy Story and Bugs Life, and the early days of computer animation. It like all looked um, a little more what's the word? Just like a little bit more like just simple and primitive. Like they didn't vary the look too much because like they just had limitations to like what the computer could do at that time. Um, but I think behind that, even like looking at Toy Story and those early films, um, Shrek, uh, even looking at those early films, there was always like artists behind those films, and they all like had that artistic intent and desire, and were trying to like push it as much as they could, but then it was just like filtered through what they could achieve with the computer at the time. Um, and I think that desire has like remained, but now the computer is able to like, there's almost just no excuses. The computer can do it all. Um, and so, and so I think recently, like studios started like realizing that, yeah, like the computer can do it all. And so why are we still kind of like limiting ourselves and um like restricting ourselves to like just this like traditional, I guess, look of what people expect 3D animation to look like, um, when we can just like create what we want to create the way we want to create it because the computer can do it all now. And there's even the cycle of like And it's funny because you can see it too in if you look at like fine art paintings, it starts off with like just like basic like I don't know simple what you will like caveman paintings or whatever. Um, just
Fine
like
art, caveman paintings.
yeah, just people just trying to like make things work. Like wow, this paint stuff's pretty cool. You slap it on the paper, look at that. Make some shapes, and then they realize like okay, but like what if I were to describe something out there in the real world, And then they're like, look, here's a painting of an apple. And people are like, wow, that kind of looks like an apple, right? But then, someone else wants to take it even further and they're like, hey, you know what? I'm going to fool these people into thinking this is like a picture, And so like everyone wanted to like prove they can make the most realistic rendition of a thing. And that was where like the wow factor of art was realism. Um, and then over time, when people just got accustomed to like realistic portraits, realistic paintings, everything. The camera came along and everyone could just snap a picture. So like realism became like a little less interesting, and um, and you get more like uh, impressionist and like sort of uh, artwork that's expressing like emotions and concepts rather than just like the literal realism. And I feel like that's where we've gotten to in animation is like we had a whole run of like trying to prove that a computer can do like realistic images, and that was like from like Toy Story all the way to like your Marvel Avatar VFX films, and just proving like trying to prove like look how realistic we can make these animals feel and this water effects and all this stuff. Um, and like at a certain point now we've gone to the stage where like everyone believes that the computer can make realistic images. But it's more impressive to see like an artist express themselves and like make you feel some emotions and um, make like show you something that you can't see in the real world, like heighten it somehow. Um, and so I think that's where like animation has naturally progressed to. It's kind of followed that same like fine arts journey. And studios are starting to kind of like express um, a little more in the style, express more like ideas, express more choices, more opinions in the style that they're attaching to the films, to the stories they're telling. In the case of Spider-Verse, like the style kind of like enforces the sort of like the genre of like the comic book, so it feels very comic book style for comic book superhero. Um, and uh, you know, Mitchell's the style is a little bit more like uh, a teenage girl's sketches in her diary type of thing. But everything's a little bit wonky and everything. Um, so yeah, in terms of Sony, it's kind of like a little bit more inspired by sort of like the stories they're trying to tell. They kind of find a fun merge of like the visual style supporting the stories. Um, and yeah, so like it's been I think really interesting like in the recent years. DreamWorks is doing cool things with like Puss in Boots, Wild Robot. Those are looking pretty like yeah, like very like artsy in the style of it all. Pixar's doing cool stuff. Turning Red is like awesome. Win or Lose, I loved also. Um, and so yeah, like I think like all the studios are like pushing for like to express themselves a little bit more. Yeah, yeah.
Have you found that to bleed into your own personal work, like outside of, going to work and the animation and the projects that you're doing, if you have time to just draw or, do you find that kind of inspiration seeping into your personal hobbies and stuff as well?
A little bit, I guess, because I think since this new wave of kind of like styles and projects, I've found myself having to get back in touch with some of the like the fine art stuff. So I'm doing more drawing than I used to do. Um, I know some of my friends are doing like watercolor paintings and things like that. And all of that like ends up sort of influencing the work we do at the studios. Because I know for the longest time we were just chasing kind of like realism train, so everyone was trying to like find as many like live action references and like film themselves and like go out in the jungle and film a tiger or whatever. So everyone was like really just trying to get capture realism, but now I think we've all been reminded of like, you know, being an artist, like a fine art artist was like the passion that like brought most of us here. And now we are like sort of able to transfer some of those skills into like the computer and into some of these
Yeah.
projects. So it's pretty cool, yeah.
That's so wonderful to hear. And what advice would you give to someone starting out in, maybe they went to university and, they got their degree and they're, trying to look for an internship or, they want to work at Pixar or something. What is your advice to them for, moving up in the ranks or kind of?
Yeah. So that's a tough one because like um I think every like the animation grows and evolves so quickly. The animation industry grows and evolves so quickly. And so the way I did it would probably not work for someone starting now. And the way someone else might have advised me to do it when they started definitely didn't work when I started. And so like um the specifics of like the step by step do change like fairly quickly, especially like it's just evolving so quickly these days. But the one true thing that kind of like lives on and like that is a truth that just has always been there is I think as long as you're putting like yourself in your work and you're thinking of like anything you're doing from like a storytelling perspective and so thinking about like what you're doing from a storytelling perspective, um, trying to like put some of yourself, some of your experiences, some of your own passions into your work will always make that work stand out over just like a generic. And it will also show like companies like why they should hire you specifically because you're the only person who can do this kind of like work. You're the only person who has these experiences, and this is what you will bring to this team. This is what you will have to offer. Um, and so I think like whenever you're creating your demo reel portfolio, if you have kind of those things in mind of like like why am I doing this character design? What is this character going to be like? Where did they come from? What are they trying to say? What's their journey? What's their motivation? All that stuff from a storytelling perspective, or it can be like if you're doing stuff like character design, or if you're doing even like lighting, which is more technical. If you're still thinking about lighting from like a storytelling perspective, like that lighting is gonna like be way more interesting to look at than just like here's a default 3 point setup. Um, so like I think yeah, like because as an industry as a whole, our goal is to make stories and entertaining and interesting stories are the ones that sell. And so showing that you're like a storyteller, like at the core, beyond just like your skills, because everyone has skills these days. It's like actually pretty easy to learn these skills. You can find like a billion videos on YouTube and make animation in your bedroom. But being like an artist and a storyteller, those are the things that will make you kind of stand out and yeah, and just keep you going like in this industry because things change so quickly and like there's different technologies, there's different um mediums, but like as long as you can like hone and develop and like showcase that you are a storyteller and also like bring some of yourself into it, like like I am super passionate, not me, but like let's say I'm super passionate about like horror films and like or I'm I love musicals and like like as long as you can bring some of yourself into your work also like one you will find it more enjoyable to make that work, but two it will really show people like who you are and why um they should hire like why they need you specifically
Right.
on their team. So that's like that would be my main advice, and I think it's often um some of the stuff that people forget when they're either teaching or like studying, because there's such a focus on like just like acquiring the skills and stuff. But like skills are stuff that you will eventually just like if you sit down and do this job like 8 hours a day for a whole week, like eventually you will get good at the thing. But like being, like a storyteller and like thinking from the perspective of like, oh, how can I make the scene more like, more interesting, more personal, more
Yeah.
like that will make your work stand out. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. Yeah, remembering like why you got into it is definitely something you have to remind yourself, especially when stuff gets tough,
Mhm.
or you're bogged down with work. But
Yeah.
kind of to switch things up, I'm gonna do the film Would You Rather, which is just one question pertaining to what we've been talking about today. And my Would You Rather would be, would you rather be, or have the choice, I guess, to be Miles Morales or any of the other Spider-Men?
Ooh, okay. I think that one's easy. I'll say Miles Morales for sure because I mean he's just got the coolest powers. Um, he can like electric zap. He can turn invisible, and then he can do all the other Spider-Man stuff. So it's like a super easy choice for me. Um, yeah, and also like I growing up, I did love Static Shock, uh, who's a DC character. But yeah, it's been pretty interesting actually that they haven't done anything with Static Shock yet in terms of like an animated reboot content kind of thing. Um, and so kind of seeing Miles Morales with those electric powers, I was kind of like, yes.
And then kind of just to round out the whole podcast, my final question that I ask everyone is, if you could tell your younger self, what advice would you give them starting out in this crazy industry?
Oh, interesting. Actually, honestly, I would give the same advice I just gave earlier about like remembering to put myself in my work and like looking at things from a storytelling perspective. Because I think when I was learning animation specifically, I and I think it's almost like a generational thing that like um back in my day, like I think we didn't see like people like me didn't see themselves in a lot of stories. And so like there was almost like the feeling that I had to adapt the things I put on screen to what people wanted to see rather than like what I wanted to show or like what I knew. And so I was always kind of like thinking more from like what will they want to see, which kind of made me like create stuff that was very kind of like just like regurgitated, bland, kind of like, um, and I kind of learned throughout my career that like actually, like I have a lot of uh, experiences and opinions and things that people around me don't have, and if I share those, doesn't that just make the world a better place? But yeah, so yeah, that would be my advice to my young self.
Oh, that's so wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. How can people find your work or see things that you've done?
Actually, I don't post that much of my work, um, but I guess you might find a few things on. I have an Instagram called Joe Darko Art, and every now and then I post some stuff on LinkedIn or Instagram. Yeah.
Alrighty.
Um, but I guess the next film I'm working on is Zootopia 2, which will be
Ooh.
coming out by the end of this year, I believe. So look out for that.
Yeah, everyone look out for that. Exciting,
Yeah,
exciting news.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
thank you again. Yes.
Yeah. No, it's been great. It's really great to talk to you, talk at you. I feel like I spoke a lot. And thank you for having me on this podcast. It's a pretty cool podcast, and yeah, I hope I get to see more of these.
If you enjoyed this podcast and want to learn more about my experience as an up and coming filmmaker or catch up on more episodes, follow me on Instagram at MELYDE12. This podcast is also available on Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. Please like, subscribe, and spread the word. Thank you guys again, and that's a wrap.